Did Konami just destroy Yu-Gi-Oh? Well, sort of, if you're an old Yu-Gi-Oh fan anyway. So I've basically garnered the reputation of being Konami's biggest critic, and I think there's a lot to discuss here. I initially had thoughts when Ruxin34 was here, and we made a short little video kind of discussing our initial thoughts about this. But a few days have passed now, and I wanted to take a less emotionally charged approach to this, because I think there is definitely a justified reaction to how Konami is approaching this. And I'm going to share my personal thoughts on the matter probably towards the end of this video. However, I wanted to structure this video in such a way to present all the information, play a little bit of devil's advocate, and then also sort of talk about the more like longer lasting implications of this and maybe why we sort of arrived at these changes and the implications that they're going to have moving forward. So for those of you who aren't in the loop, what exactly am I talking about? Well, recently at 7 p.m. Pacific time on a Saturday night, of all things, someone stumbled across this in the newest documents that are changing the rules for the Time Wizard tournaments. If you're not aware of what Time Wizard is essentially our version of retro formats. They just deem it Time Wizard just for branding and, you know, keeping it in the Yu-Gi-Oh theme of things. Where essentially you take a snapshot in time of a format such as the popular Edison format, the second popular Goat format, Tengu format, Hat format, whatever format you want is considered a Time Wizard tournament. These new rules are going to be in effect for all Time Wizard events that are Konami sanctioned moving forward. That means both starting at the NAWCQ, which takes place in just about a month at the time of recording this video, but also this even counts for like if you go to locals that are Konami sanctioned, because you have to abide by the Konami policy, and these stores are going to be at risk at losing their status if they are caught like not abiding by like Konami sanctioned like rule sets and such. And so we're looking here at this random adjustment that someone just like happened to stumble upon. There wasn't like an official announcement about this or anything. It sort of just like made the rounds. And again, like Saturday night at 7 p.m. Pacific, that's like 10 p.m. Eastern. We'll get to that in a little bit, but let's go ahead and talk about what we got here in front of us. So what are the rules for a Time Wizard tournament? New. The answer, Time Wizard events use the available cards, Forbidden and Limited list, rule regarding drawing on the first turn, and the dueling field of the selected Time Wizard format. So what they're saying here is that the available card pool, whatever the Forbidden list is, Forbidden and Limited list is of any particular format, interestingly, it keeps the card drawing rule, and we'll get to like why that's kind of weird momentarily, but also the dueling field as well, which would make sense. We're not going to have like an extra monster zone in Edison format, right? Starting at the NAWCQ, current game mechanics and current card text will be used for Time Wizard events. This is where a lot of the controversy is, and we're going to get into why that is momentarily, but imagine taking a snapshot format from 2010, 2005, and now all of a sudden, after cards have been errataed, after game mechanics change, after all these different things, we're going to play what they're kind of deeming advanced Edison, if you will, because we do obviously play like the advanced constructed format for TCG or whatever. So we're trying to modernize a retro format, which is a bit paradoxical in nature in and of itself. So for those of you who are not like super into retro or alternative formats, this may sound like a positive because from the perspective of newer players entering retro formats, one of the biggest barriers to entry is the fact that the rule sets, I don't want to say are entirely different, but they are different enough that it actually is like problematic for players who want to enter the format, because if they are modern players playing retro, they're not going to be familiar with how Yu-Gi-Oh! Used to be played because the game is 25 years old. And we're talking about a 15-year discrepancy at the time of recording this between modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And Edison format, which is the most popular retro format, and what most of this video is going to be centralized around. I'm going to touch on Goat format a little bit just for some from card example purposes. I understand the angle that they're trying to get at here because they're trying to make the format more accessible, but we're going to discuss why that just isn't going to work. So let's go to everyone's favorite website, Dueling Book, and talk about the ramifications of these changes. And I have this split up into 3 separate sections. I have card erratas, I have card rule changes, and then I have cards with ignition effect priority, which is kind of like a subsection of like rule changes, but we'll get into that in a moment. So let's start by talking about erratas. So if you are unaware, Konami over time has errated physical cards. Personally, I am against this philosophy. I think if you're going to like change a card and how it functions entirely, they should just ban the card and then print a card that is like inspired by that card, right? A great example is like Pot of Greed and Pot of Desires, right? Pot of Desires is not Pot of Greed. It still draws you 2, but it has a major downside, but it's in the spirit of Pot of Greed and even like pays homage to Pot of Greed by having Pot of Greed in the artwork, right? So like, it's still like Pot of Greed, but worse, right? And so I feel like that's the approach, especially in a physical card game, that's just, they should have taken this approach from the beginning. And so this is where like things are going to start getting murky. So I'm going to start with GOAT format. Sinister Serpent, if you didn't know, has been errataed in the sense that before, every single turn, you could get Sinister Serpent to your hand, but now the text reads, during your standby phase, if this card's in your graveyard, you can return it to your hand. Also, banish a Sinister Serpent from your graveyard during your opponent's next end phase. You can only use this effect once per turn. This effectively means that you can only use Sinister Serpent every other turn instead of every turn, and that's pretty important for decks that require it for discard. If you're recycling Graceful Charity with like Magician of Faith, there's implications there, right? I mean, this is a very powerful card in GOAT format for a reason, and we're starting with GOAT format just because I just want to just show how this isn't just like an Edison format problem. This is going to probably affect every alternative format in some way or another, but these are the two biggest ones. DMOC. DMOC is a huge part of GOAT format, especially if you play like the Reasoning Gate turbo decks and things like that. And DMOC is errata is that now you can only use the effect once per turn, where initially it was unlimited, so you could like DMOC and like Dimension Fusion, bring back DMOC, and like keep recycling and like over and over again. But now you can't do that anymore. Night Assailant has a change where now, before, if it was sent from the hand to the graveyard, you could target any flip monster and add it to your hand, but the errated version is you can't do another copy of Night Assailant, and the reason for that is because you could infinitely loop Night Assailant, essentially, and have infinite discard fodder, and they deem that to be too good, so they errated Night Assailant. Rescue Cat actually affects both Edison as well as GOAT format, because Rescue Cat is a critical part of several decks in both formats. But now that it's errated, it's basically just killed all the cat decks of these formats, because the errated Rescue Cat says it also negates the effects of the monsters that it summons, where the original copy did not do that. And so that is a huge difference if you're playing like X-Saber. Good luck summoning your Air Bellums and getting in to rip cards out of your opponent's hand, or if you're playing any of the cat decks in GOAT format, like you can't do any of the stuff anymore because the effects are negated. So good luck with that. Sangan's another big one. Sangan sees a lot more play in GOAT format than it does Edison. It can see play in Edison, but it's funny, it's deemed actually kind of slow for Edison. But it has a functional change where whatever you add to your hand, you can't activate cards or effects of the cards with that name for the rest of the turn. So if you go like, flip Sangan, attack, add like a card to your hand, you can't use that card. You can like maybe summon it or set it, but you can't use the effect of that card anymore. So that slows down Sangan tremendously in terms of like how effective this card is. Will it still see play in GOAT? Probably, but like in Edison, it was already like deemed kind of slow, and now it's even slower. So now it's going to probably not see, it's probably going to see even less play, to be honest with you. And the last GOAT card is Ring of Destruction. Ring of Destruction in GOAT format was like one of the most simple cards because it just popped a monster and both players took damage. But this card received like one of the biggest erratas, where now you can only use it during your opponent's turn. You have to target a monster who has equal or less life points, equal to the attack of whatever that monster is. You can only activate one per turn. It's limited, so that didn't matter really anyway. And it also deals the damage to you first before it deals damage to the opponent to prevent draws, which is one of the biggest issues with Ring of Destruction, is that it could force draws very easily if you were like in a losing position. But typically, you would go like attack with a monster, ring your own monster, and then they just lose the game. That's like a very common play in GOAT format. Can't do that anymore, so like that's dead, but it's still like a decent piece of spot removal, so like it might still see play regardless, because like in the early stages of the game, the life point thing doesn't really matter, but in the late stages of the game, Ring of Destruction becomes basically unplayable, so that really sucks. And so let's get into Edison, right? Like, we can keep going here. So we have Raikou. Raikou is like one of the like top cards in Edison. There's so many decks that like revolve around Raikou and Rescue Hamster and that package, and now Raikou is functionally different and arguably extremely buffed compared to what it was. Like, Raikou is already a really good card, but now it's even better. So if you're unaware, Raikou in Edison format actually targets. So here you can see it says it destroys one card on the field. That's all well and good, but the fact that there's a big difference between targeting one of your opponent's things and they can possibly react to it if it's like outside of the damage step, let's say, versus Raikou flips, you have to now decide if you're going to like preemptively fire stuff off, because if they target it with the Raikou, or excuse me, if they destroy it with the Raikou, there's no window for you to activate that card anymore, right? So if you have like, I don't know, like any sort of like draw trap or like, you know, just whatever, right? Now you like Book of Moon, like just anything that's like chainable, let's say, you have to decide if you're going to proactively flip that card, because Raikou could just destroy it, and now you're no longer going to get the value of having that set card. That's a huge change for Raikou and makes any deck that plays Raikou even better than it already was, because there are so many instances where that type of effect, even in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, is very much a headache to deal with because you're not targeting anything in particular. Treeborn Frog has an errata where it's only once per turn, and that may not sound impactful considering the fact that you're able to, like, in Edison format, just keep bringing Treeborn Frog back, hypothetically. However, Royal Oppression is a huge floodgate in the format, and so now you can Royal Oppression Treeborn Frog, and they don't get it back anymore, where before, you could obviously, you could just keep chaining Royal Oppression and Treeborn Frog keeps coming back, but now you can't do that anymore. So that's a big change for frogs. Speaking of frogs, Swap Frog actually, I believe, had a functional change as well. It has the ability that you can only gain the effect once per turn for the normal summon or set of an additional frog monster. I think there might be something else in here as well, but in any case, for like the frog combo deck specifically, like Swap Frog has actually had like an errata too, so like that can change things. Dragon players got completely shafted by these changes because Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon also had an errata, where now it's only a once per turn type effect. So it says you can special summon this card from here by banishing a dragon. That's the same. You can only special summon Red Med once per turn this way. I believe that's different. I believe you could just summon multiple Red Meds if you wanted to. And then in addition to that, during your main phase, you can special summon one dragon monster from your hand except Red Med, and you can only use this effect once per turn. So before, you could have like multiple Red Meds and just like start spamming stuff, but now you're locked out of being able to do that. And speaking of dragons, Future Fusion is another big card that doesn't see play in every deck because only certain decks can actually play it, but this card was also errated, and now instead of setting the materials immediately upon activation, you have to wait a full turn cycle in order for those materials to be sent, which has huge implications because now there's so many more forms of removal that can actually deal with it. Like turn 1 Future Fusion for dragon decks, for any of like Frog Hero or just like any deck that can support Future Fusion was huge because there was just like no way to interact with it. But now you can go turn 1 Future Fusion, it's going to sit there for a whole turn, and now your opponent has the ability to interact with it and possibly stop it before it goes off on the following turn, because on turn 1 of the standby phase is when it sends the materials instead of immediately upon activation. Then we have Brain Control. Brain Control is arguably like one of the top 5 cards in Edison in terms of like power level. Brain Control plus Caius can almost crack any board in the format. Brain Control's win rate is just like exponentially like through the roof in terms of like when it's activated versus like if that player actually wins the game or not. It's a card that everyone tries to play around because even though it's only a one of, it's limited in Edison format, it's still an extremely powerful card. And so this card has an errata where it says target of face-up monster opponent controls that can be normal summoned or set, take control of that target until the end phase, which now means you can't take stuff from the extra deck. You can't take certain boss monsters because certain boss monsters have the text that they can't be normal summoned or set. It limits like the power of this card immensely, and so that has huge implications for like how the format's going to play out. And we haven't even gotten to the extra deck monsters yet. We have 07 to Goyo Guardian, right? Because like this card got one of the worst erratas of all time, requiring an Earth Tuner specifically, and basically rendering the card unplayable under most circumstances. Granted, it got, you know, just power crept over time, but most decks are not playing Earth Tuners unless you're playing like X-Saber exactly, right? So Goyo Guardian basically is unplayable. And like you might argue that that's a good thing because Goyo Guardian's like one of the best synchros in Edison format, but Goyo Guardian has a very important role because it's like a card that you can make that like deals with an opposing Stardust Dragon. It's just like, just dismantling like one piece like just kind of ruins the way that everything else is. But we're not even taking out like one brick out of like the Jenga tower. We're taking out like the entire bottom half and hoping that that's like going to somehow like fix itself, right? Brianak, talking about like things that are falling from grace, has huge erratas here. So Brianak not only the errata before is that the unerrated version of Brianak, excuse me, is that you can discard as many cards as you want and bounce as many cards on the field back to the hand. That's you and your opponent. Brionac's errata is that you can discard any number of cards, that part's the same, but you can only target cards your opponent controls, which sucks because there are cool plays with Brionac where you bounce your own cards back potentially. You bounce the cards back to hand, but Brionac's also a once per turn. There were instances where you can go like Brionac, pitch a card, bounce, pitch a card, bounce, and it's like you're slowly picking apart your opponent's board. You don't have to go like all in at once. But now you can't do that anymore. So, like, that has huge implications there. Ancient Fairy Dragon's a bit of a more obscure one. Like, not a lot of decks play this card, but this card also did receive an errata where you can only use the effect of it once per turn, I believe, where before you could just, like, keep spamming if you had multiple Ancient Fairy Dragons. Not a lot of decks play Ancient Fairy Dragon, but I figured I'd just throw it in here because it was a card that received an errata. And Armory Arm's an interesting one. This card, like, got errataed and then, like, unerrataed, strangely enough. And, like, in its current state, it basically, I think, still works the same, but it says original attack, where I think the original copy just says attack. I think it's still, as far as Colossal Armory Arm OTKs go, which is primarily what Armory Arm is for, I think it still basically works the same. So it's not that big of a deal, but it's interesting that they errataed and then like basically unerrataed a card over the course of its lifespan. And I'll go into like later on why that like is kind of important, because it obviously shows that they can unerrata cards, right? And I think that's like part of the discussion here is like, there's a lot of working pieces because we have the erratas, we have rules, like there's a lot of working parts in terms of like the overall implications of like how this is going to change Edison format as a whole. But this is just the erratas, okay? Like, let's go ahead and get into the actual rules part here before we get into ignition effect priority, which is still technically a rule, but I feel like it's like a subsection. So in terms of rule changes, Edison format would now be using modern rules, right? Well, what implications does that have? Well, DD Crow gets a lot better because with a card like Dandelion, for instance, this is the classic example everyone's bringing up, if I actually know how to spell Dandelion, which apparently I don't. There we go. So in Edison format, if you pitch Dandelion to an effect and someone DD Crows the Dandelion is Chainlink 2, it still resolves because Dandelion technically hit the graveyard and you get 2 tokens. But now, with the modern rule changes, you can use DD Crows at Chainlink 2 when your opponent pitches like Dandelion for like quick draw or like whatever type of effect, 1-for-1, whatever. And now Dandelion will no longer resolve. So that has implications for any decks that play Dandelion. My Body as a Shield got changed at some point where now it works in the damage step, where previously during Edison format, it does not. Does that mean My Body as a Shield is going to see a lot more play? I don't know, but it changes the rules for like how a card like this works. Gear Town. So field spells have gone through some changes over time, and one of the changes to the rule set with field spells is that if you set a field spell over another field spell, it no longer just destroys it, it just sends it to the graveyard via game mechanics. That has huge implications for Gear Town because this is a type of deck where people would play Gear Town, set over another Gear Town, and just like be able to pop it because it's considered destroyed and summon it 3000 Ancient Gear Gadgetron Dragon as part of what their deck is trying to do. Now, are top decks playing this? No, but for any of the Gear Town decks that would function this way, this is a change that is actually big. Speaking of field spells, actually, there's a card I forgot to add in here. Necro Valley is a card that has, I think, maybe the most changes to it out of any card in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game. It seemed like every year they changed how Necro Valley worked in some capacity. So now we're no longer going with the Edison version of Necro Valley. You go with the modern version of Necro Valley, which is like errata 29 of this card. And Necro Valley's arguably gotten stronger since Edison format, which means that like Gravekeeper gets a buff in that way. Is that necessarily good or bad? It's like too early to say, but it has implications for how it's going to affect the format. Rivalry and Gozen. This is a big contentious point for a lot of people, which these cards basically have saw zero play in Edison or like very little play for the most part. But now the rule is changing to the modern interpretation of Rivalry and Gozen, where in Edison format, you can actually tribute a monster for another monster of a different type, because, or attribute in the case of Gozen, because it's like considering like it's not, you no longer like have the monster on the field essentially. So like I think that's like why that works that way. But in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, you can't do that. You can't even attempt to summon a monster that is a different type in the case of Rivalry or the different attribute in the case of Gozen. So that's something that has huge implications because a deck like Black Wings, for instance, is a deck that doesn't care about either of these effects aside from like maybe Rivalry, because then like Dark Arm Dragon conflicts with all your winged beasts, but like for the most part Gozen is unaffected because the whole deck is dark. And you could be like, oh, but it affects the extra deck. Blackwing doesn't really need the extra deck, to be honest with you, and honestly you have the ability to still make Armwing and Armor Master because they're still either dark and or winged beast, which is basically what your whole deck is. So a lot of people are fear mongering that it's like, oh, it's going to be like, you know, floodgate, you know, turbo now, because now you can like play these, and these cards basically hit every other deck in Edison because there's very few monotype or attribute decks in Edison for the most part. I mean, like, there are stuff like fairies and such, but like even then, the vast majority of decks are like kind of hodgepodges of like multiple different archetypes that kind of work together, like Frog Hero, but even decks that are like kind of like presumably monotype, like zombies and such, still play other like non-zombie cards. Like Diva's Zombie, for instance, plays Deep Sea Diva, right? So that has implications there. Mind Crush is a weird one. So like in old Yu-Gi-Oh, if you didn't know this, if you Mind Crush your opponent, you actually get to look at their hand to verify that they no longer have copies of the card. This got changed at some point where now you kind of just have to hope your opponent's not lying to you that they are discarding the card for Mind Crush. You don't get to see their hand anymore and don't get that hand knowledge. That, for anyone who plays Mind Crush, that has implications there. And something I haven't seen many people talk about is SIGOC, as a matter of fact. So if you're not familiar with SIGOC, it's the acronym for Simultaneous Effects Go On Chain. And so what does that mean exactly? Well, in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, if I tribute a Sangan for a copy of Caius the Shadow Monarch, both of these are mandatory effects. So because the ability at which point I can stack my chain, both of these cards met their triggers. Sangan went to the graveyard and Caius got tribute summoned. I'm able to stack the chain in any order that I want because they're both mandatory effects. In Edison format, SIGOC works differently, where when a card like goes to a different zone, it resolves first, or like it has to be chain link 1 because it met its activation condition before anything else did. So in Edison format, if you tribute Sangan for Caius, Sangan has to be chain link 1 because it met its activation condition first and went to the graveyard before Caius the Shadow Monarch was officially tribute summoned to the field. Why that matters is because with SIGOC, you can make it so that Sangan is Chainlink 2 and Caius is Chainlink 1, which insulates you from a card like Pulling the Rug, where most of the time in Edison, Caius is always going to be Chainlink 1, or Chainlink 2 rather. So in that case, you can Chainlink 3 Pulling the Rug and actually kill the Caius. So this allows you to chain block now, and this is just like a very basic example of SIGOC. There's other implications here as well, but just so you understand like how this works, that's a huge thing, because being able to like protect from Pulling the Rug, which is one of the top side deck cards for any of the Monarch based decks, and Caius being like a top 5 or top 10 card that's played in the format, that is actually massive in terms of the fact that you can protect your Caius now from being hit by one of the most popular side deck cards for this deck. And we haven't even gotten to Absolute Zero because, oh my god, this is a complete mess. So Absolute Zero, if this card goes back to... This card says, if it leaves the field, destroy all monsters your opponent controls. In modern Yu-Gi-Oh, if Absolute Zero is bounced back to the extra deck specifically, it does not trigger, and that probably is correct, to be honest, because it's so weird that a card can trigger from the extra deck. But in Edison, it does work like that. So if you use like a compulsory evacuation device, if you Brionac bounce Ab Zero, there's like a million different things that like bounce something back to the extra deck, or shuffle it with like a Ryza, for instance, right? In Edison, Ab Zero still triggers from the extra deck, which like arguably makes no sense, right? So like maybe that's a change for the better, and we'll get to that later. But that has lasting implications as well, because even though Brionac took a significant hit in terms of like how playable that card is, that's now just a clean out to Ab Zero that like basically every extra deck's gonna play, because it's like one of the top 2 generic Synchro 6 monsters in the entire game. We're not even like halfway through this video, and you can just see how different Edison format already is, and we haven't even gotten into like the full meat of it yet. And so then for my next set of cards, we have Ignition Effect Priority. So if you're unfamiliar with Ignition Effect Priority, this is a way that Yu-Gi-Oh used to be played. I forget at what point they changed it. It wasn't long after Edison format, but basically any spell speed 1 ignition effect that was like played off of just like a card that was a summon that did not start a chain, I believe is how it works, which is a normal summon or an inherent special summon. So something like let's say Dark Grepher, which we'll talk about here in a moment. You are then allowed to retain priority and activate a spell speed 1 ignition effect before your opponent has the chance to respond to it. And so we're going to talk about GOAT format for a little bit here, because this does affect some cards in GOAT format. So for instance, if I go normal summon Exiled Force, I can use priority to immediately tribute Exiled Force to target and pop a monster that is on your opponent's side of the field. In normal Yu-Gi-Oh, or I should say modern Yu-Gi-Oh now, priority no longer exists. So if I were to normal summon Exiled Force, my opponent has the ability to respond with a card like Book of Moon or Torrential Tribute or something like that before I'm able to use my Ignition Spell Speed 1 effect to tribute off Exiled Force to target a monster and destroy it. What cards does this affect? Well, if we're sticking with GOAT format, Tribe Infecting Virus is another one where you can go Tribe Infecting Virus, retain priority, pitch a card, call a type, and just nuke your opponent's board if it's like Warriors, for instance, right? That's a very popular deck in GOAT. And if you call Warrior, you have basically no way to interact with this card except like exactly Solemn Judgment, because it would negate the summon before you even get the chance to activate priority. So Tribe Infecting Virus basically gets to wipe your field for free. And if you were to have, like, let's say a bottomless trap hole, in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, you could bottomless the tribe before it has the ability to activate its effect. But unfortunately, it doesn't, so Ignition Effect Priority is going to wipe the board. BLS is another one for GOAT format, where if you just bring them out, you could immediately prio banish something on the field. That also goes for Chaos Sorcerer, which is over here because it's also an Edison card. Same thing, you could summon Chaos Sorcerer, use priority, target something to banish, and your opponent like can't interact with it prior to that activating. Now, there's an argument to if priority is good or bad for the game in general. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Let's first talk about all the other Edison cards that have implications here, because there's a lot of them, as you can see. Lone Fire Blossom. This is very popular in a lot of the plant decks, and a lot of the plant decks are very good. Where in Edison, you can go Lone Fire Blossom immediately with priority, tribute it off, and start going into your plays. Where in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, if your opponent summons a Lone Fire Blossom, you could maybe Book of Moon it, you could like try to find some way to like, you know, do something else to it so that it is no longer on the field to tribute itself. But in Edison, you just immediately fire it off, and your opponent really can't do much about it, again, except for like Solemn Judgment or very few other cards that can interact with it, like Divine Wrath and like random crap like that. Dark Refer is a big one. This card sees a lot of play in a lot of different decks. It has the ability to not start a chain to special summon itself to the field, or you can just normal summon it, immediately priority. You can pitch like a Vayu or a Sirocco, and you can dump a card to the graveyard, and your opponent doesn't really have a way to interact with it. Giga Plant's another one. If this is summoned off of like Supervised specifically, and it already has its effect with priority, they can special summon like a plant back, which is like Titania or something like that. You have no way to interact with it there. Substitute is maybe one of the most egregious ones that gets hit here, because not having effect priority means you can actually like interact with Substitute in a somewhat healthy way. But this is like one of the best cards in Edison, because this card is broken as hell, and takes a pretty big hit here without Ignition Effect Priority, because that was like one of the reasons why Substitute is so good. Same thing goes for the boss monsters, right? Dark Arm Dragon and Judgment Dragon. So in Edison, you can slam down Dark Arm Dragon with priority, banish a dark, and immediately target a card for destruction. This is before they even get the chance to like bottomless it or torrential or do whatever they want to it. So like Dark Arm Dragon guarantees pops a card. Or Judgment Dragon's the more egregious example, because you can Judgment Dragon, immediately declare priority, pay 1,000, and you're threatening to wipe the whole board before your opponent gets any chance to respond to it. We already talked about Chaos Sorcerer. Card Trooper's another one. You can prio like mill 3 immediately, which is really good for any deck that like plays out of the graveyard, which is a lot of them. Gale's another one, because if you just like normal Gale or special Gale, you can immediately prio like have a Stardust Dragon, which is really huge. Sirocco's another one that technically has priority, even though this is a card that doesn't have used priority very often, but there are instances, because there are cards in Edison format that miss timing, such as Dupe Frog. So if you're unfamiliar with this, missing the timing is a concept where if you have a when effect that's you can, this is an ability that you are able to potentially disrupt, because if it is something that resolves as Chainlink 2 or higher, it is not considered the last thing to happen, which means the effect does not resolve. So with Sirocco, there's like some niche instances where you can go like normal Sirocco, effect priority to use its effect, and then chain like Torrential Tribute. And if your opponent has a dupe lock, because these are when you can effects, they're both being destroyed as Chainlink 2, because the Torrential resolves as Chainlink 2, kills the Dupe Frogs. Sirocco resolves as Chainlink 1, and the Dupe Frogs don't get a chance to activate their effects. So like there are niche instances with Sirocco that you can Ignition Effect Priority, but it's like not super common. Red Med's another one you can prio. As soon as you summon Red Med, you can immediately bring a dragon back, so your opponent, like even if they have removal, doesn't matter, because they're going to get the dragon anyway. Lila has prio to be able to pop stuff, which you can argue whether or not that's good, but like you can do it. Same thing goes for Lumina. I threw Cyber Valley in here as well, because the second effect, you can technically target a monster and banish 2. That's pretty good, because if you already have like a guy, or you went like Brain Control Steel, you can go Cyber Valley, prio, banish to draw 2 before your opponent has like Torrential to pop everything, because it tributes for cost too. So actually no, it doesn't. It banishes for effect, as a matter of fact. But in any case, you can still prio it anyway. So it's like that's like the main deck monsters. And then extra deck stuff, Power Tool Dragon's another one you can prio if you just immediately go Power Tool. This is very important for the Gigavise deck because it's trying to get into like Supervise and stuff. So like you have no way to like meaningfully interact with Power Tool. Brio, we already talked about in the errata section, but it's also important for prio because when you summon Brio, you can go prio, immediately discard a card, kind of similar to Dark Arm Dragon to like bounce something, but that's something that like you can't do anymore. Dark End Dragon's another one you can prio if you absolutely want to. Like that's just, I figured I'd throw that in here. And so the lack of ignition effect priority, whether or not you think it's a good or a bad change, just changes the entire landscape of not just Edison format, but all retro formats that play with priority in general, because now all these other defensive options become a lot better because you're able to interact with the cards prior to them activating their effects. So for instance, Book of Moon has been a like pseudo staple card in Edison format as well as GOAT format for like since like the inception of the format. Like you may not see Book of Moon all the time, but it's pretty common you'll see Book of Moon like in a tournament at some point. It's good like both main deck and side deck for multiple reasons. I'd say lately it's fallen out of favor compared to some other decks, depending on the type of deck that you're playing, because like Gladiator Beasts benefit from it. It's good just into Blackwings generally, so that's kind of why it sees some play. But now all of a sudden, Book of Moon becomes like maybe one of the best cards in Edison because all these cards up here, and again, this isn't a complete list. I'm just kind of picking out like the highlights of like what's important when it comes to ignition effect priority. If your opponent goes like summon Lone Fire Blossom, now you can Book of Moon it before they tribute it off, and that's a meaningful way to interact with a card like this. And so a deck like Gigavise takes a huge hit because of the fact that ignition effect priority is no longer in the game, because a lot of the effects in the Gigavise deck were able to be used with ignition effect priority, so your opponent had very little ways to interact with it. So Book of Moon just gets a huge buff. So now it's like, oh, my opponent goes Dark Grepher, I can Book of Moon it before they start standing stuff for Vayu decks, right? Substitute, my opponent goes Substitute, I can book it, and they can't just immediately prio tribute it to get like Swap Frog and start doing all the frog shenanigans. If my opponent goes Dark Armor JD or Chaos Sork or BLS, if you're playing GOAT format, I can book it before they have the opportunity to actually pop my cards. This also doubles for a card like Compulsory Evacuation Device. It's not exactly Book of Moon, but it effectively functions in the same way, where it's going to bounce these cards back to the opponent's hand or extra deck in the instance of the extra deck monsters, so that they never get the opportunity to fire their effects. So now Compulse, which was sort of a side deck card, I would say people would tech it in some instances. It was never like a card people would max out in most instances, but it saw play. It didn't see like a ton of play in every single deck, but you would see Compulse around, and you still do. But now, this card becomes similar to Book of Moon, like a god card, because now without ignition effect priority, especially with Absolute Zero and the interaction there, Compulse becomes absolutely cracked. Bottomless Trap Hole and Regular Trap Hole, funny enough, which does see play, don't laugh, both of these cards now become a lot better. Bottomless Trap Hole is already semi-limited in Edison format, but even with that, it still sees play in basically every deck that's not a combo deck. People are playing Bottomless. Bottomless is now even better because like half of these cards up here lose to Bottomless and they don't get the ignition effect priority. So for like Red Med, right, you can Bottomless it before they bring something back, so they don't get the extra body. You can Bottomless the Grepher, which is good not only because they don't get the dump, but now it's also a banish, so they don't have an extra dark in the graveyard for something like Dark Arm Dragon, which you can also Bottomless, so that way it doesn't immediately pop a card. Like, you can just see how intertwined like all of this is with all of these changes and how it's going to have this like rippling effect across the format. Speaking of other cards though, Raigeki Break and Phoenix Wing Wind Blast, and I guess Karma Cut, which is a card I forgot to throw in here as well. All three of these are discard traps that are removal in different ways. Raigeki pops any card, Karma Cut banishes the monster and all the other monsters in the grave, and Wind Blast stacks it to the top of the deck. So they're all discard traps that come into -1, but without the lack, or excuse me, with the lack of ignition effect priority, these cards all now become way better than they were before. People are already playing Raigeki Break and Wing Blast and sometimes Karma Cut already, but now these cards become infinitely better because you are still taking a -1. However, you're preventing your opponent from getting like major pluses when it comes to like Red Med or Dark Armed or JD or like Sork or like any of these, right? And so now all of a sudden, like these defensive options become way stronger and it just have like just lasting implications in terms of like how it affects the format as a whole. So I think I've done an adequate job of sort of explaining all, or at least most of like the major implications of how these rule changes are going to affect somewhat GOAT format, but primarily Edison format, because Edison format is the most popular version of retro Yu-Gi-Oh! But now I want to sort of play devil's advocate a little bit here and sort of come from the angle of, how are these changes actually beneficial to the format as a whole? Because initially when I first saw this, I was like everyone else and I was reacting very heavily, and I was like, oh, like retro Yu-Gi-Oh's dead. And as I've had a few days to sort of like mull everything over, I think it's good to play devil's advocate, because there's an argument that these changes could be beneficial in certain ways. I think the negatives still outweigh the positives, but I think it's important to explore both sides of it before forming a complete opinion. And so I want to go back to the erratas here, right? And so let's look at this from the lens of like, how is this good? Sinister Serpent is a very good card, and so like arguably, like you could say, like if it's every other turn, it still like kind of does what it wants to do, but it's not like as good as it would be otherwise. DMOC, you can make the argument, was used in decks that are like pretty degenerate, like Reasoning Gate, and so while it does kill like certain decks in the format, it's killing like the degenerate decks that are kind of non-interactive anyway. So like, is that a net positive, even though it's taking away the ability for certain people to play certain decks? Rescue Cat, I don't think does like anything super degenerate in like, it's like, it has decks in both formats, but I think it's like whatever. The Night Assailant thing, I think is like fine. Like you can still get plenty of value with Night Assailant and Chaos Turbo by getting back Spy, Decoichi. Like there's so many flips in there. So it's like, yeah, you can't loop Night Assailant, which is important, but like negligible, right? Sangan, like it's kind of like fine. Like again, Sangan wasn't really played in Edison like that much anyway, but like Goat, it's kind of important. So like you could say that. Ring of Destruction force draws, and so like that's the argument for Ring in a lot of instances, because it's like if you're on low life and your opponent's also on low life, you can Ring and force a draw if you're in a losing position. It's still spot removal. It's not going to be used all the time, but it is still spot removal. The Raikou change is hard to justify. I think buffing Raikou as much as it is kind of cracked, and so this one, I have a hard time kind of like seeing the good, because this card just gets infinitely better in like every way. So I can't really defend this one. Treeborn Frog, it kind of is still just the same. Like aside from the oppression thing, or like being able to, I don't know, do stuff like what, enemy controller, like Treeborn Frog, bring back Treeborn Frog. Like maybe that's another interaction that's bad. I mean, it definitely hurts the Frog deck, but at the end of the day, it's like, it's still Treeborn Frog. Like you're still getting your +1 every turn. Like in most instances, like there are like those like corner cases where it's going to be bad, but like it's kind of still the same card. Swap Frog is also still basically the same card, like in like the regular like Frog decks and the Frog Hero decks. I think it's still functionally exactly the same, at least from my understanding of like the errata. Like I think this only really hurts like the Frog combo deck, like Forgs, more than anything. But even then, I think they like Frogs like have a bunch of issues, because it's like it hits Treeborn, hits Substitoad, but you know, that is what it is. Red Med and like kind of Future Fusion by like extension. Future Fusion is arguably like one of the most unfair cards in Edison, because like again, turn 1 Future Fusion in Dragons, send 5 dragons, like that's kind of busted. And even in like the more like simple examples where you go like reveal Ab-Zero, dump like Mali and Treeborn, like you're still Foolish Burialing 2 cards when Foolish Burial is a card that's limited to 1 already. And so a lot of the instances with Future Fusion, like it's one of like the power cards in Edison for sure that not every deck can play. Maybe there's an argument that like improves the format, aside from the fact that it basically kills dragons outright. Like because dragons, like that's one of the reasons to play the dragon deck is Future Fusion. Red Med getting hit as well, but like you can't swarm with like Red Med as much, but it's like it still kind of works the same. BrainCon's another one where it's like a lot of things you can steal with BrainCon are still able to be stolen with errated BrainCon, but like you can't take boss monsters and you can't take stuff from the extra deck. And don't get me wrong, that still like has huge ramifications. If you think to all the games where you use brain control, most of the time you're using it to like sack for a Caius, synchro off into something else, or to like remove something that's annoying, right? Like there are some instances where you are going to brain a dad and it's going to feel really good, right? But I feel like for the most part, most of your brain control targets are going to be things that are able to be normal summoned or set. I'm not saying the card doesn't get hit in a really significant way, because like being able to brain con your opponent's like boss thing that can't be normal summoned or set and just like hitting them for game is definitely a play, sure. I want to say more often than not, like you're stealing stuff that is still going to be a target for brain control. So like the card gets hit, but it's still playable, I would say. The Goyo one I can't justify. Like, Goyo should have never gotten errated in the first place. It was, like, I think this was, like, such a knee-jerk reaction. So similar to Raikou, I really can't justify this one. They should just, like... It's tough because I feel like there's a world where we could have the retro formats with these new rules, but if we got the unerrated versions of the cards still, I think there would, like, maybe be an argument for that. But then we still have Future Fusion, so, like, that's kind of rough. Brio's tough because it's like, it really is like deck dependent. If you're playing like Zombies really relies on Brionac for a lot of its combos for like its OTKs. And so it really hurts that deck in particular. But like most of the time you can make the argument that you're going to make one big like bounce with Brio anyway. It's just like a lot safer in Edison because you can do like one card at a time to make sure they don't have something to respond to. You know, it's kind of the same card, but like it's just not exactly the same. Ancient Fairy is like whatever, and Armory Arms, whatever. And then we go back to the other cards, right? So if we go here, like DD Crow's still going to see play because it's just a good side deck card against a lot of like the top decks. The My Body thing, My Body doesn't see a ton of play already anyway. Does it matter that it works in the damage step? Kind of. There's like some cards it hits now versus not, but like whatever. The Gear Town thing, you can make the argument where it's like, oh, well, you know, not many decks are playing Gear Town anyway, but like the fun of Edison and retro formats in general is the fact that typically they're touted as formats that have quite a bit of diversity, and Edison is definitely one of those where, yes, there are like a top echelon of best decks, but we've seen recently in past both like RBETs as well as the official Konami events that are Time Wizard, there was like 20 different decks that can win or top an event in Edison. Like maybe even 30, to be honest with you. Like the format is just so wide. We have the rivalry and the Gozen thing. This is like probably how these cards were always meant to function if we're going by modern interpretations. And I think this is a bit overblown if I'm being honest, because like these cards don't even really see play in Edison as it is. Just because they work in this particular way, this is mainly like a thing against frogs, exactly, because like frogs, you can tribute a frog for a monarch and that's like allowed. So the fact you can't do that anymore really hurts that deck in particular. And like, again, like everyone's talking about, oh, like Blackwing Hysteria, it's going to be like S tier deck in like advanced Edison format. I don't know if I buy it, to be honest. Like Edison has so much removal in it. Like that's one of the reasons why the format's like really good and balanced, in my opinion, is that like it's really hard to justify sticking these floodgates. Like the floodgates that do see play is like Oppression and like what, Mask of Restrict. Like there might be like one or two others, but for the most part, it's like they have to be like game-winning cards most of the time. And like Rivalry and Gozen in older Yu-Gi-Oh are not like how they are in new Yu-Gi-Oh, because like again, this format in particular, Raikos are everywhere. Like, I mean, we have like Triple Dust Tornado, we have Heavy Storm, we have MST, like People Side Breaker. Like there's like a myriad of different ways to out stuff like this. There's all this stuff in the extra deck potentially. Like there's like, I don't know if I buy this argument. Like, I know a lot of people are like modern brained and they see a floodgate and they're like, ooh, like I'm gonna throw this in. I don't think these are as effective in older Yu-Gi-Oh, and like historically that's like always been true. So I think this is like a bit overblown, but like it potentially could matter, but it's like it's hard to tell because we haven't like seen what advanced Edison actually looks like. The Mind Crush thing about revealing the opponent's hand, you have to trust your opponent, right? So like there is that aspect to it, but I think for the most part, like 99% of people are going to be truthful. And also like if they have like a second copy of the card, you can kind of just like call a judge at that point. We'll get to judging in a minute here. The Seagawk thing definitely has implications, but it's so hard to figure out like where exactly that's going to matter a lot. Like this is a very powerful interaction here, but it is what it is. Ab-Zero not triggering when it gets bounced back to the extra deck, kind of good. Like, I actually kind of like that change because it doesn't make sense that something triggers in the extra deck. Like, that's just, like, nonsensical to me. So I think this is actually a net positive. There's also, like, very few ways to positively interact with an absolute zero just because, like, no matter how you get rid of it, it's going to wipe your board. So I think having an angle of counterplay that doesn't actually immediately kill you is nice, and I actually think that makes it like a more healthy card because like everyone knows Ab-Zero is cracked, and like it's just like it's such, anytime it just gets dropped it feels so annoying because you know the only way to really play around it in Edison is to just not overcommit, and you just have to play like such a slow game because then they drop Ab-Zero, oh, the board's wiped. Like as soon as it hits the board, you're gonna lose your whole field. And so very annoying card to deal with, but having an angle that you can actually just bounce it back to the extra deck, it doesn't resolve. That seems pretty good. And then we get to our prio cards here, right? Is it good for the format that we have all these defensive cards that are going to like slow down the format in a way that is actually like net positive. Like being able to Book of Moon a Lone Fire Blossom, being able to like bottomless a Dark Refer before it resolves its effect. Like this, if anything, this really cuts the modern combo decks down quite significantly in terms of their power level, because that's something that the Edison format specifically is sort of, I don't want to say struggling with, but it's becoming a bit of an issue where people have now gone back with like modern deck building philosophy, and we're getting to a situation where we're seeing people bringing these like modern combo decks into Edison, which is like, you know, touted as being like older Yu-Gi-Oh! It's a slower format. And it's funny because it's like, if you're trying to get like a snapshot of the old format, no one was playing these decks, but we're looking at the format with fresh eyes and with new perspective. And now we're seeing the rise of like Gigavise, as well as like the Forg deck, right? And these changes actually really cut down the power level of these decks, because now the plant deck doesn't have all the ignition priority stuff with Lone Fire, Gigaplant, and Power Tool. It doesn't, like the Frog deck, like almost a lot of the power cards in Frogs, like Substitute and like all that, are also getting hit. Being able to have like more defensive options to like create like a slower game, which is like, Edison's like slow, but it's not like as slow as like, you know, other card games, let's say. It's still Yu-Gi-Oh! At the end of the day. You can make the argument that like this is actually like a good thing. Like no one feels good getting like Prio Tribe Infecting Virus for like 4 cards on the field. No one feels good that you can't interact with the Lone Fire Blossom. Everyone hates when Dark Refer hits the field because it always resolves its effect. And again, unless you're playing like some weird effect negating card like Fiendish Chain or something like that, because that's legal in the format. Being able to interact with the Substitute before it's able to go off and do all the frog shenanigans. Like, there's plenty of options here that allow you to do that. And there's more than this. Like, again, this is just like the top ones that I could think of. Being able to interact with Dad or JD or Chaos Sork before it like starts completely eating apart your board. Or even interacting with like the lower tier stuff, which is like in the second row here. Like, I wouldn't say like I ever feel like out of the game if my opponent Prio's Card Trooper, right? Or if they like Prio Gale. But like in the instance of I have Stardust Dragon, obviously one of the biggest outs of Stardust Dragon is just normal Gale, Prio half it, and you can just attack over it because it goes down to 1250 and Gale's 13. But now you have a way to interact, because now you can go, okay, they normal Gale, you can book it, you can compulse it, you can trap hole it, you can do any of the discard traps on it, and now you can protect your Stardust. So it promotes meaningful interaction and has like a heavier emphasis on like these defensive options that make it so that it doesn't feel like some of these cards feel like as unfair as they should, because like effect priority should have never existed in the first place. Like, I'm just going to straight up say it. And I would make the argument that the removal of Prio, even though it is not Edison to remove Prio, I think that would be a net positive. If they only remove Prio and nothing else, I think that would be a net positive for the format, because it slows it down enough that like some of these cards don't feel nearly as impactful. But it's like, it's weird because at the same time, then stuff like Dark Arm and JD, as powerful as they are, like when you slam them and then they just get like booked, you feel kind of bad, right? But that also now means you have to like have meaningful counterplay and realize like, oh, I can't just slam JD and nuke the board anymore. I can't just slam Dad and just nuke like at least at minimum one and like eat a second card like for removal. That actually means that you have to play in such a way now that's like a lot more cautiously, because back row just has so much more value compared to what it did before. I guess I should show Torrential in here as well, just because like Torrential can stop stuff on summon too. So like that also like gets a buff, even though it's a limited card in the format. So now I want to go back here and talk about like some of the problems with this. Like we've kind of talked about all the implications that like all these changes are going to have. We've played devil's advocate in terms of like how like there might be a positive here. And so we're going to get into like the issues that are both good or bad with these changes. I think we'll start with like maybe the positive. We'll do like, you know, the compliment sandwich sort of thing. Let's start with the positive first. What positives come out of this? Well, it makes the format arguably more accessible, because if someone who only played Yu-Gi-Oh! Post Ignition Effect Priority, like post all these different rule changes, it makes it more accessible because now they know that their modern interpretation and understanding of the card game is going to apply to this particular retro format. So they don't need to learn or relearn rather how Yu-Gi-Oh! Works as a game. Like a boomer like me who played back in the day understands Ignition Effect Priority. Like I understand all these different things, but I was there. And a lot of people who play Yu-Gi-Oh! Weren't there, right? And so being able to make it more accessible for people to be like, hey, maybe I should try out Ultimate Time Wizard. I think that's like maybe the angle they're shooting for, is to try to make the format more accessible. By extension, if the format is more successful and more people are like coming in droves to play retro Yu-Gi-Oh!, that's only a net positive, because then it's like growing the player base and keeping the game healthy. But for me, I feel like that's really where the positives end and the negatives really outweigh the positives. So, for instance, when it comes to Time Wizard events specifically, the whole purpose of the Time Wizard format is to go back in time and play the format in such a way that it was played back in the day. If you want to play Edison in 2010, if you want to play GOAT format in 2005, whatever your flavor of retro format is, that is the whole purpose of Time Wizard. And so these changes go against that entire philosophy, and I understand that it could be a higher barrier to entry, that as a player who maybe only played Modern and wants to explore these retro formats, you look at it and it's like, well, I have to learn how all these other cards used to work, because the PSCT on the new versions of the reprints of the cards aren't how the cards function. Take Raiko, for instance, right? Like, people who read Raiko now might not think it targets, but guess what? It does, right? So that's something you'd have to explain to people. There's also the fact that there's also all the different rulings when it comes to Edison and such, where it's like, that's something that if you understand modern Yu-Gi-Oh!, the cards don't work the way that they did in these older formats. And so that could be possibly frustrating, because it creates that friction of like, oh, I didn't lose because like I got outplayed, I lost because of a lack of knowledge. But I don't really justify that as an argument, because it's like, when you're entering any card game, or any game for that matter, there are set rules, and as the player of the game, it is your responsibility to know the rules of the game going into it. And if you lose as a consequence of the lack of knowledge of those rules, that's on you more than like blaming the game. There's also the fact that if you've played retro formats, and especially with like Edison, the amount of people that you will meet that said, I have not played Yu-Gi-Oh! In 15 years, but I learned that Edison format is a thing that Konami promotes as a, like, well, I say promotes, they don't really do that, but that Konami has as an option for them to actually play in an actual tournament like they would be playing back in 2010. I think, like, I'm not joking, like 10 to 20, maybe 30% of the people I've met playing these retro formats like Edison were people who played back in the day, took a 15-year hiatus, and then came back. Like, this story you will hear over and over and over again. And one of the biggest problems with these changes is that now you have the opposite problem of the modern people trying to get into Edison. You have the old boomers who actually liked playing old Yu-Gi-Oh! Wanting to get back in, but now they don't know the modern rulings. They don't know how cards are supposed to function in 2025, because so many cards, as we've shown throughout this video, work completely differently. Like, someone's gonna pull up with their like Rescue Cat deck and be like, oh, sorry, Rescue Cat doesn't work like that anymore. That's going to be a frustrating experience. So you have friction from both sides, that you have both problems in like opposite directions of like modern coming to retro and retro coming to modern, and neither side is happy with that, because it like just creates like, they're trying to like cater to the modern audience to get them into playing, instead of bringing back the boomers who used to play, which goes against like the whole philosophy of Time Wizard in general. Another argument I've seen is when it comes to judging. So if you're unaware of this, when it comes to retro formats that Konami hosts at the YCSs for Ultimate Time Wizard, rulings have been an absolute nightmare. There are some events where it is perfectly fine and there's not really many ruling disputes, but I would say probably more often than not, there are rulings in these tournaments that are not how the cards were ruled back in the day, and have like game and match determinative effects that will like make someone win or lose the game, because something is ruled incorrectly because of the lack of knowledge from the judges of how the things were ruled back in the day. And so I think that's also part of Konami's MO here, is to try to, if you streamline it that everything is like modern rulings and card text and interpretation, they don't have to train judges or educate judges on a different rule set for a different type of way to play the game. I don't like that argument, because Konami is not a small indie company. They have the resources that they could train judges appropriately. They have the ability to compile a database of rulings for the old formats that these judges could refer to for these types of formats. And you know what? The crazy part of this whole thing is that the community's already fucking done this. So if you're unaware, there is an entire website that literally you can type any card in Edison, and it will pull up the rulings for that particular card. So if you want to know about fucking Necro Valley rulings, there you go. If you want to learn that Rivalry of Warlords allows you to tribute summon in Edison, which is like not how it works in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Look, it's literally the first thing. While you control a face-up monster, you can tribute summon a monster using only face-up monsters, even if it has the wrong type. E.g., your opponent's face-up monster is Treeborn Frog, you can tribute it for Caius the Shadow Monarch. The community has literally done all the work, so clearly a multi-billion-dollar company that has infinite resources could do something like this, but they don't want to. And this also frustrates me because this gets into how under-supported the Ultimate Time Wizard has been from its inception. So if you're unaware from when Ultimate Time Wizard was first launched as a concept, Konami historically has this pattern where they come up with an idea, they don't promote it, and then after a year or two, it dies, and they're like the guy who sticks the stick in the wheel spoke of his bike and falls over, and it's like, oh, why didn't people come and do this, like, cool side event thing? Because they don't fucking promote it. I can tell you, like, on one hand, the amount of times I've seen Konami, the Twitter account or any of their official social media pages have promoted that there's an Ultimate Time Wizard happening in tandem with the actual YCS that's taking place at any given moment. I'm pretty sure people like myself and other content creators have promoted more than Konami that the Ultimate Time Wizards are even taking place, and there's been questions in like Discords and like in group chats of like, is there an Ultimate Time Wizard? Like, they didn't make any announcement for it, and you find out that like the signups have been up for like a week or so, and then people aren't able to sign up because like no one knew that it was even going on in the first place. Like, I can't tell you the amount of people I've talked to who were like, I didn't know they were having an Ultimate Time Wizard. Yeah, no shit. If you're not going to promote it, then like how are people going to know that it's there? And speaking of like lack of promoting anything, the fact that people found out that this is how the NAWCQ and all future Ultimate Time Wizard events are going to be like done moving forward, the fact that it was like discovered at like 7 p.m. on a Saturday night, you're telling me they didn't know that there was going to be major blowback for this announcement for people who are so passionate about playing these older formats? They were trying to just like skirt it under the rug, think that people weren't going to find it, and then like eventually people were going to find out, but then like all of a sudden it just started spreading like wildfire, and you see the reaction to this. They usually like will post stuff on their social media accounts at reasonable times, depending on the time zone in which account it's being posted from. If it's like US or EU or whatever, they're usually posting at like 9 a.m., 10 a.m., maybe noon sometimes, maybe like in the early afternoon. But like 7 p.m. on a weekend, they obviously knew that this was not going to go over well. And at the end of the day, it's something that we don't want to talk about, but it's obviously the main motivator here. It's money. We know that Konami is a money-hungry company, and like any business should be. But at the end of the day, Edison and the retro formats do not make them money. You can argue that when they have a 200-something person event that caps out at a YCS that people are paying $20 for, oh, crazy. They revenued $4 grand off of this Ultimate Time Wizard event when they had to pay like at least like 10 times that to rent out the venue space, to get the judging staff, to do like all the things you need to do to run an event. Events are loss leaders. Like, they're not making money at these events. This is just to like help like promote the game and like keep like, you know, people interested and have a reason to like get the cards so you can actually play with them. Like the competitive scene is like such a minority comparatively. And so when you look at it through the money perspective, and I've had this discussion multiple times with like other content creators and other friends and stuff, Edison and other retro formats are extremely hard to monetize, because look at it from Konami's perspective, right? Like recently in some of the rarity collections and some of the other side products, we've seen reprints of the most popular Edison cards, whether it's like Raiko or Caius or like, you know, whatever. Like it's like they have basically at this point reprinted every single like relevant Edison card, especially like now with Magical Android being in the new Battles of Legend or whatever. Like they've basically reprinted every Edison card that like had a scarce printing, because it's like Edison's a very old format. Some cards only have like 2 or 3 printings, but a card like Magical Android is played in like basically every deck. So like even a common or a rare of Android was like $10 or $15. It was ridiculous. But point being, they've basically reprinted every single like relevant Edison card in side products to like help incentivize, you know, people buying that product, right? Because then they shove it in like a side set. It's like, oh, look, if you need some Caiuses that are like, you know, not the ulti ones, but they're still like very shiny because they're like 25th anniversary, like you can buy this side product, right? They basically can only do that one time, or multiple times if it's different cards. But once they've gone through like reprinting all of the relevant Edison or GOAT cards or whatever, they've kind of exhausted like the monetization capabilities of like what they can do to actually like monetize this as a format, because they're not making money on like entry fees from like going to like YCSs for Ultimate Time Wizards. They're arguably, like, people are buying the product to get, like, the Edison reprints, but quite frankly, people are probably buying the product for, like, the actual chase cards, and then the Edison cards are more of just, like, oh, if you pulled a 25th anniversary, like, Raiko or whatever, like, congratulations, you can sell that to the Edison community on the secondary market. Like, great, good for you. And so if you think about it from a monetization perspective, if this doesn't make them money, then why are they going to support it, right? So you could make the argument, and I don't want to put on the tinfoil hat conspiracy theory here, but you could make the argument that these changes are to disincentivize people to play retro formats, because now, oh, you can't really play your retro format in the way that you want to. Come play modern Yu-Gi-Oh! So that way you're back to buying more products, so that way, like, that's a way that they actually can make money. And there are other ways that they can monetize it, and it would be like a home run. Are they going to do it? No, probably not, given the way that the direction of this is going. But for instance, imagine if they made like an Edison battle pack. That would be like one of the most genius ideas imaginable, because it is a way to repeatably play Edison that requires you to repeatedly buy product if you're going to like draft or play like limited with your friends. And so you're doing that while also reprinting the Edison cards, and you can put like CR Caius or like collector rare Raiko or like whatever. Granted, a lot of these cards got like reprinted to death in rarity collection, so it's not like they didn't have that much value anyway. But you could have like, if this was like prior to rarity collection, you could have had like exclusive rarities of these cards that are maybe like the second or third highest rarity behind like the original prints and like Ulti and Ghost and stuff. And that way it's like, oh, someone's just like drafting or playing limited in terms of like battle pack Edison, and then they pull like a CR Caius or something, and so it's like, oh good, like they got like a sick pull, right? That would be like such an insane way to like actually like monetize it. But again, they can only really do that one time. They do it once and they kind of exhausted it. They made their money on it. Cool. Now what? So overall, I'm a bit conflicted. I feel like there is a world where these changes to make advanced Edison could not be as bad as the community wants to like overblow it and make it seem like. But at the end of the day, that's not us playing Edison. That's us playing a different custom format entirely. That's catered in a specific way to make it easier for Konami to like run these particular events. And even if this is like part of a bigger plan of implementing, like maybe they just do an Ultimate Time Wizard YCS, I doubt it, but like maybe there's bigger plans for that. And so by streamlining the process and making it like more just kind of like reining in the loose ends of like a retro format, maybe that's the angle they're shooting for. But I doubt it, to be honest with you. That just seems like way too optimistic, because they probably don't want to risk that, you know, no one's going to show up, even though at Nats last year, I think they almost doubled the capacity for what the Ultimate Time Wizard event could be. So clearly there is demand for this, but it's a matter of like, where are we going here? And I think the biggest reason that people are upset with these changes is that this is not the Edison that has been growing and fostering for the past like several years. Like, a lot of this has been grassroots effort to get people to play what a lot of people consider like one of the best retro formats, or even like the best formats like in Yu-Gi-Oh! Period, because there is so much depth, there is so much skill expression. Like, it's reminiscent of older Yu-Gi-Oh!, which is what a lot of people like, because a lot of people don't like the modern way that Yu-Gi-Oh! Plays, and people want to experience Yu-Gi-Oh! In its more like raw, pure form, when you can like set one back row and you're gonna actually have like a game that goes over the course of multiple turns, right? While I can understand the perspective of like what they're trying to do, I think it takes away from like the heart and soul of what the retro formats are meant to represent. And like the people who are playing in these formats, that's what the experience that they want. They don't want to play with new card text. They don't want to play with new rulings. They want to play Yu-Gi-Oh the way that it was supposed to be. That was the whole point of Time Wizard in the first place. And now we're just in a scenario where the community is just going to get fractured because we haven't seen the NAWCQ yet. We don't know what the turnout's going to be. We don't know if there's going to be like 5 people that show up to play Ultimate Time Wizard versus when Keegan throws an RBET that it's going to like cap out because it's playing the old Edison. So maybe there are some people that are fine playing Advanced Edison, but I think fracturing the community and splitting it is going to have long-term implications for how much people are actually going to enjoy playing this format. And then you're going to run into the issue of like, anytime you want to play Edison with someone, are they going to want to play actual Edison, or are they thinking you're referring to modern Edison or advanced Edison or whatever the hell they call it? So that's going to be an issue as well. And that's like the reason I feel like a lot of these other retro formats struggle to become as popular, is because there are issues like that where it's like there's multiple interpretations of like a similar format depending on where you cut off the timeline for it. But Edison has always been like very concrete in terms of like, this is like where the format sits. This is the card list. This is the forbidden list. Play the game. I want to say I hope that Konami reverts the changes, but they never do. They just basically, they implement something and then they just steamroll it. Everyone like riles for like a week and is just like, oh, like this is the end of Yu-Gi-Oh, whatever. And then we just go back to like just dealing with the game as it is. And it's frustrating because you feel like it just like doesn't matter in the end. And so I don't know. I'm in the camp that it's more bad than good. I can see the argument for that maybe there is hope. At the end of the day, Advanced Edison is going to be a completely different format. And time will tell if people are like okay with that because it's the only Konami sanctioned way to play the format, or if it's just going to be like Super Smash Brothers or like any of like, you know, like the small like fighting game communities, right? Where everything just has to be like grassroots, and it just, that's going to be like the way that we keep this format alive that we all love playing. So thank you for listening to my like hour-long discussion about a retro format for a children's card game. Did not think I would rant for that long, or I guess discuss, because it wasn't really, it was kind of a rant, but it was, I'd say, more of a discussion. I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say, because it's quite the hot topic in the community right now, and I think it's something that's frustrating a lot of people because it feels like something's being taken away from them that didn't have to be. Like, the way Ultimate Time Wizards and Edison format was going with being officially sanctioned, it wasn't ideal because, like, there still wasn't a clock for players to see. The judging, there was a bunch of issues. Like, it wasn't perfect, but the fact that it was officially sanctioned, like, gave it some credibility. It gave people an incentive to grind aside from just playing in the grassroots tournaments, you know, like RBETs or any of the other events that people throw online, right? It, like, from the people want, like, you know, the big giant card that they give away, which ironically is like worth more than the actual prizing that people get for modern Yu-Gi-Oh, which is hilarious. It just kind of sucks. I don't think anyone's really happy with the decision. There's a few people that like might see the silver lining, but like even then it's like we're just kind of accepting like the fact that like it's like we're going through the stages of grief, right? It's like that's really like all we have to go on at this point, and we're kind of just like getting around to the acceptance of like, okay, well, this is how it's going to be. Where do we go from here, right? Do we settle for Advanced Edison, or does everyone boycott and we go just play, you know, in the grassroots tournaments, and we just kind of keep it as something that the community built, and we just kind of ignore Konami altogether? Anyone can tell you who's competed at these Ultimate Time Wizard events that it is like a night and day experience compared to like the people who are playing modern Yu-Gi-Oh, because most of the time there are going to be the people that are spiky and are going to be try-harding in Edison. Like that's going to exist in any competitive environment, right? But for the most part, even the people like that, like 99% of the interactions that I've had with people are so overwhelmingly positive because everyone's just having a good time. Like, we're over here just like summoning Shura, like tributing for Caius, and it's like, even when people lose, like they're like totally cool with it. But like anytime the people from the modern like Yu-Gi-Oh come over to like the Edison people to talk, they're all just like, man, like this sucks, like this happened, like they have their bad beat stories, and like Edison's gonna have its bad beat stories too, but like it's almost like a completely different vibe in the same venue. There's like this like bastion of positivity in like the corner where all the Edison people are, and then the rest of the event is just like everyone just fuming because they have to play modern Yu-Gi-Oh. I can't really like describe it it any other way. Like, unless you've experienced it, and anyone in the comments who's been to, like, Ultimate Time Wizards and stuff can also, like, attest to this for the most part. The vibes are just completely different because people are, weird concept, actually enjoying playing the game. And I think, you know, we kind of like lose sight of, like, at the end of the day, it's a game and it's meant to be fun. And I think for a lot of people, Edison is fun, which is why we're seeing such a strong reaction from the retro lovers, because we thoroughly enjoy playing this version of Yu-Gi-Oh! And now it's being stripped away from us in a way that, like, no one asked for, and it seemed like there wasn't any issue with it to begin with. One final side note, it's also just, like, the best way to go to an event. It doesn't start, at least for US, because I know EU's different. In the US, you show up at, like, 10 or 11 a.m., so you can, like, enjoy your morning. You register, or you already registered, but, like, if not, like, you just, like, check in, basically. You start playing at, like, 11 or noon, and then you're done with, like, your 7-8 rounds, like, pretty quickly. Like, you'll be done with, like, all of Ultimate Time Wizard before the main event's in, like, round 4 or 5. Like, this happened at the last YCS that we did for the 3v3 Ultimate Time Wizard. We got there at, like, 11, and we were done by, like, 6. So then you're not there till 1 a.m. You just get to go out and just, like, have dinner and just, like, enjoy it. And, like, if you top, then you go back the next day. But, like, it's such, like, a more relaxed, reclined experience compared to, like, try-harding modern Yu-Gi-Oh! That if you haven't done it, even though it's going to be Advanced Edison now, like, I would still recommend trying it just to, like, get an alternate perspective of, like, how Yu-Gi-Oh! Can be. And like I said, the vibes comparison is, like, indescribable. Like, if you go to the event, like, you understand the people in the Edison area are just, like, having the time of their lives. Like, they're just, like, having a great time. And so that's all I got. I wanted to make this, like, just a giant rant video, but I thought it would be better to be more, like, objective and try to, like, take emotion out of it and just, like, discuss both sides and, you know, let you come to your own conclusion. I don't really know if I'm going to keep attending Konami events as a result of this, because the main reason I was going was to play Ultimate Time Wizard, and if Ultimate Time Wizard's not going to be abiding by the normal Edison rules, then I don't know if there's much motivation for me to go, depending on maybe the way the format plays out. Maybe it's, like, still fine. Maybe it improves the way that the format is. Like, we don't know yet. Like, there's still a month at the time of recording this before the NAWCQ. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. And so, if you do want to play, like, Edison as intended, I would highly recommend looking into the RBETs run by E3 Yu-Gi-Oh! Because you're going to get the raw experience there. And Keegan throws some great events, and a lot of people love them. So check that out. I think he's actually throwing one in Indy as a result of Konami making this decision, and I think he has just about secured the venue at the time of me recording this. He will make announcements soon. I'll maybe put a link in the description or something, but I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. I think a lot of people have a lot to say about this on both sides, and I think it makes for a good discussion. I tried to lay out all the arguments here, and so I'd love to hear what you all have to say. So thank you so much for listening to me yap about Yu-Gi-Oh! For an hour, and we'll see you next time. So guys, that's going to wrap it up for another video. I really hope you all enjoyed. Let's go ahead and shout the patrons for all their continued support. So shouts to Shadow1317, Tim00x3, MBT Play Madolce, Moto, Cameron L. Smith, The Synchro Guy, Pony Stark, Little Fayley, Dan the Man Hoban, Draconic, Brian Dancer of Class 7, Dylan Rare Hunter, JW11860, Flannel Daddy, literally all of the guinea pigs, Cheeks McLapperty, MBT canceled by community soon, canceled by committee soon, canceled by all players soon, Wonder Waffle, Daniel Howell, MBT and Nimnim's One Boxer Brief Fueled Night of Passion, Electrician of the Ice Barrier, The Noble 129, Chris Adams, and Lillamancy. Thank you all again so much for watching, and we will see you next time.